Here we are at the last chapter. This is chapter 13, Gothic art. And I think for a lot of you, Gothic art is going to be one of your more interesting chapters because we start thinking about our popular culture interest in Goth and Gothic, and all already we have a positive thought to impact. But Gothic art is probably a lot different than what you think it is. It is more than gargoyles and more than monsters. So, the birth of Gothic style at the Abbey Church of St. Denis in France, and this is my rendition of the Abbey Church. The finest success in the Gothic cathedral and all of Gothic art that we'll look at is the Chartres Cathedral. And there's a big difference between Gothic art and what we looked at for last chapter. And part of the difference is the pointed arches and the masonry rib vaults and flying buttresses, as well as all the beautiful colored glass windows. All of this happened because of urban growth, which helped in the formation of professional workshops. And in those workshops, then we have illuminated manuscripts and then the work on windows and on the architecture itself. So this is part of the Holy Roman Empire, and German sculptors continued to employ heightened emotionalisms that had been established in Ottoman art. Throughout Europe, artists made Christian-themed metalwork, relief sculpture, and manuscript illumination. You can see some of the differences here on this page. Notice how much more dramatic and striking the sculpture is down there. And then when you look at the Gothic cathedral from the inside, that is not anything like the plain and somber inside of cathedrals that we're used to looking at. So the Gothic cathedrals in England, and this one is from England, is much taller than French ones. And then English builders pursued unique decorative features such as fan vaults, and that's what this is, and pendants. So here we are in all of Europe around 1200, and you see that we have the Holy Roman Empire, and it goes all the way down through this whole area from Germany and Cologne and Milan and down to Sicily. And then we have this whole big, huge kingdom of France, England, Ireland. Then we have the kingdom of Aragon here. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. All right, it began mainly in France. There are four things that make architecture Gothic that I want you to be looking for. One is the pointed arch. So the arch is going to come to a tip at the top, the ribbed vault, and then the flying buttress plus the colored glass. The Romanesque architecture and the pointed arches of the Spanish Moorish architecture, it's inspired the Gothic architects to take it one step further. It's easy to recognize Gothic buildings because of their arches, because of the rib vaults, because of the flying buttresses, because of the elaborate sculptures like gargoyles and stained glass windows. It was originally known as French style, and during the period of the Renaissance, it fell out of fashion to not respect the many artists that worked on it, and they marked them as Gothic to suggest as crude German barbarians or Goths. The big examples of Gothic architecture is Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris and St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. All right, so themes. First theme you're going to see is Virgin Mary, and Notre Dame actually means Our Lady Mary. And so I've talked about this before that you will see many, many churches called Notre Dame, and it becomes confusing because they're all saying this is Our Lady Mary church. It's also a theme of the life of Christ and saints. There's portraits, and secular life becomes really important in all of this. The forms of this are going to show out and how immense churches are, and they dominate with the Gothic architecture. There are increasingly optical approaches to figures in space, and there's lavish ornamentation and materials. All right, so note, here we are. Here is St. Marie Magdalene, and notice how plain that looks when we're looking at the west facade of Reims Cathedral. I mean, can you have more ornamentation on the outside of a building? Well, I suppose you could, but it would be difficult to do so. Inside, here's a Santiago de Compostela at Spain, and I think it looks almost somber, and it's a beautiful church, beautiful inside. But look at with the pointed arches at the rib vaults at the top. It's just a completely different style. And then it's, of course, dominated by these beautiful stained glass windows in the front. Dates. Early Gothic began with St. Denis at 1140 to 1190. High Gothic, where Chartres Cathedral is about 1195 to 1300. And Late Gothic is St. Chapelle at about 1300 and beyond. The developments are that towns become cities, organizations and guilds like art guilds and other guilds come into power. There's centralization of power, such as feudalism, which helps develop the monarchy at the time. And instead of all the variant churches in the war between the churches, the Catholic Church begins to dominate here. Somehow I repeated that. Sorry about that. Here are, this is a high Gothic piece. Note all of the decorative capitals on the arches here. These are jam statues that are found as part of the building. And this is on the west facade of the Reims Cathedral. Okay, other characteristics are the result is that they are airy and bright inside because we have flying buttresses, we have pointed arches, we have rib vaults, and it allows for the church to open up. But we also have large stained glass windows which open up light inside, and the ornaments and pinnacles inside also. Within this, we have the urban center growth, we have sophisticated country life, and we have the cult of the Virgin Mary. All right, where Mary becomes a dominant part of the church. Gothic architecture, here are the two arches. Builders look from a semicircular unbroken arch to the pointed arch. They look lighter, they point upwards, they have less thrust on the semicircular arch, they solve geometric difficulty that are inherent in rib vaults. Excuse me. It's impossible to arrange all the arches and ribs to a common level using an exclusive semicircle rib. So with pointed arches, ribs are easily made level. And so you look down the hallway here with this pointed arch, and you see how each one is exactly level. Gothic architecture is not all about ornamentation. The style brought innovative new construction techniques that allowed churches to go to great heights. Here we are at St. Denis. This was the beginning. All right, an important part you'll see of Gothic style architecture is Abbot Suger, and he remained a central focus in all of this. He was the advisor to Louis V and Louis VI and VII, strengthened ties with church and monarchy, and it was a royal church. It belonged to the king of that time, so to Louis VI, and Gothic style linked with centralization and access of power and authority to French kings. And I know we've had an awful lot of monarchs throughout the time that we've looked at, like Justin and Constantinople, that were the king was an important part of the church, but it is really magnified within this period of time. All right. This is a site of the 7th century burial place for French kings. And numerology of the portal was really important to them. The Trinity was represented in threes. So there were a lot of threes here. Notice at the front of the church, you've got 3 doors, you've got 3 sets of windows. So threes became real important, like triumphal arches in ancient Rome. This definitely was a turning point for French Gothic. The space, the light, the line, the geometry all created transcendent modernist architectural vision. Abbot Sugar rebuilt portions of this Abbey church and used this innovative structure and decorative features. Doing so, he is said to have created the first truly Gothic building looking at luminous, uninterrupted light. So you see how important he is within this whole style of architecture. Okay, so here is the plan of the choir and ambulatory of the Abbey Church of St. Denis. And notice some of the things you didn't notice before, like the radiating chapels, the ambulatory, and notice the design of how the curves and everything are going in that. He also designed Lux Nova, or stained glass. Glass was really important to him, that he thought that it brought heaven on earth. Importance, the Virgin as intercessor. Gothic sees her as importance grows, as she represents the humanity of Christ and linked to divine love, and she is actually supposed to be the go-between of the church patrons and Christ. Sugar, able to cross boundaries of Christ's mandorla, indicates his significance. So here's a bishop window in the Abbey Church, 16th century stained glass. And there we go. There's a lightweight spring vaults, and that's part of the St. Denis Church. And here's the plan in the East End with 1140 to 1144. And he thought that the building was too small for the pilgrims, so they needed to rebuild. This is the head of Moses, which is part of a jam statue on the right portal of the west facade of the Abbey of St. Denis. He's from the Old Testament, and they use prophets on the jambs and the doorways on purpose. This is the ambulatory, and you see all of the, when we looked at the plan, all those zigzags around, those are all windows. And there it is from the inside. You can see how that zigzag goes in and out. Here's a groin vault. It is the intersection of the two barrels, and it's coming up here into a point rather than an arch. And the use of them began in late Romanesque, allowing for an open interior of the church. And using them with the points gave them flexibility of design. The walls were thinner and lighter and allowed for more windows. And the light was more inside the church. So if you click this link, it's going to tell you more about Abbot Sugar and the ambulatory. All right, and here's an example of a Gothic window. This was dedicated to St. Denis, the 3rd century missionary who became a bishop of Paris. He was martyred about 258. Picked up head and walked 5 miles to the current site of the Abbey Church where he is buried. So he has the head there. The bishop window is made out of stained glass. All right, we're moving on to France. And this is located, this is Chartres, and it's located about 40 miles from Paris. And when I started looking at all of them, since we've heard so much about Notre Dame, they are one big blur and are confusing to me. I think if I was able to walk around Paris and see all the different Notre Dame cathedrals, maybe it would be easier. But they all have something in common. First of all, most of them have a rose window on the front and have towers coming up like this. So, and you know that Notre Dame recently burned. So I'm sure that in its reconstruction, it's going to look different than it did originally. The right tower on this was first done, and then the left tower was done in the 16th century. It represents both early Gothic and late Gothic, and so you can see the development and look at the towers. So the one on the right, early Gothic, and the one on the late Gothic, and so there's more decoration and everything even involved in it. This, of course, then is dedicated to Virgin Mary, and there's supposed to be a relic of clothing worn during the birth of Christ there. think it's founded by donations from wealthy taxes and the bishops. There is the west portal of Chartres. And again, here you have the three doors in the Trinity. Here is the aerial view of Chartres, and it's just really incredible to start looking at how much goes on to this. You can see it has the traditional cross shape to the church, but all of these things coming off the outside are the flying buttresses, which allowed it to go up higher and have the support from the outside so that there wasn't as much support on the inside. And then again, here we have the jam statues, and there's jam statues all along the doors here. They're the door jams, and they all are figures from the Old Testament. This is a south portrait of Chartres in France. And then you can kind of see the flying buttresses a little bit easier. You see these square towers opposite to the more pointed tower on the other side. They're heavily ornamented on the west work. There are rose windows there. Both of those are rose. There's a large area of stained glass all the way through. And of course, we've already talked about the skeletal support system. And we've looked at the doors. There's the jambs. They are made to fit in the space, and that's why they're so tall and thin. Later jambs became more three-dimensional in design. There was more use of naturalism. There was an increasing trend for naturalism in Gothic period, even with all the decoration. And the relationship between the column and the sculpture started to dissolve, that they became more like sculptures than columns. This is St. Theodore Jam statue on the Porch of the Martyrs. So you can see these are later. This is 1230, and these look more like people than the others did. They're more three-dimensional. The nave was severely damaged in 1194 by fire. So instead of using the compartmentalization of Romanesque, they used this open space. So the impression is light and heaven, according to Abbot Sugar. There's an example of a Gothic stained glass window, or lux nova, and this all tells stories of faith, basically from Virgin Mary, and they also are symbolic light. And the methods of stained glass limit the size of the pieces. So it was really difficult, and they're very heavy and hard to maintain. And there's lots of precious jewels and things involved in making the glass look like this. So this is Our Lady of the Beautiful Window. The side has almost all of the original 180 windows. Imagine being in a church and walking in to see these 180 pieces of stained glass, but only part of them survived from the 1194 fire. They transport the viewer like the Byzantine mosaics do, but the one thing that mosaics did not have was the light coming through. And so when you're inside of the church, inside the cathedral, this is what you see all over the walls. What could be more decorative than this? And then this is a detail of what a flying buttress does. They're all freestanding bricks or stone supports attached to exterior walls by at least one arch or a half of an arch. So you see all of that support there, then supports all of the brick and everything on the outside. Okay, we're moving on to Laon, France. And here is an early Gothic facade of the Laon Cathedral. Looks very different than what we just saw with Chartres. Not nearly as decorative ornamentation-wise, but we do have the trinity of repetition here. We do have the doors with the jam portraits and the rose stained glass windows. We also have the ambulatory with the plan and the nave in the long cathedral that was similar to the others. This is interior looking northeast, and I mean, it is just white and pristine and goes on forever and ever. All right, so here's the comparison. There we saw from the inside what a rib vault looks like inside a Gothic cathedral. And this is actually how it's built in from a Romanesque to a Gothic. And you can see right away why the Gothic is more decorative. Earlier Romanesques relied on barrel vaulting, where Gothic builders introduced the rib vaulting. It uses the columns to support the space. Right, we're moving on to Paris. And the history of Notre Dame of Paris stands on the site of Paris' first church, Saint Etienne Basilica, which itself was built on the site of the Roman temple to Jupiter. If you don't find that ironic, then you have no sense of irony. Construction in the current cathedral began at 1163. Construction of the west front, which has distinctive two towers there, began about 1200 before the nave had been completed. And over the construction period, numerous architects worked on the site, as evident by all the different styles. Between 1210 and 1220, the fourth architect oversaw the construction in the level, which the rose window, which is seen right here, and the great halls beneath the towers there. The main features are the sculptures continued to have a religious and an educational purpose. And here's an example of Adam and Eve. Materials used were stone, but wood became popular, thus the fire. Figures became independent from architecture, more realistic and natural. Use of curved lines and intentions showing movement. And there was an interest in expressing feelings such as suffering and happiness. All right, this is on the west front. And you can see that we've gone way beyond jam portraits that were going up with members and figures going up the sides along the doors. So look at how elaborate that is, and look what we find up above the door up here. I mean, very, very decorative, full of information. These are the three west portals of Notre Dame, and they're early Gothic. They were sculpted between 1200 and 1240, and they all depict scenes from the life of the Virgin Mary, the Last Judgment, and the life of Saint Anne, or Mary's mother. This is a beautiful rose window, which dates at about 1220. It's a west window. I understand that this was not damaged because they took it out to clean it right before the fire occurred. It is 10 meters in diameter and exceptionally beautiful. It was dated about 1220 and it retains most of its original glass and tracery. The main theme of the rose window is human life, featuring symbolic scenes such as the zodiacs. Aha, there is no church there. Laborers and monks. So here we have the humanism coming into part of the cathedrals, which is, really a break away from what you saw in Romanesque. On the exterior is fronted by a statue of the Virgin and Child accompanied by angels. Unfortunately, the interior view of this colorful glass is no more half blocked by this great organ that sits there. The south rose window was installed at 1260. Its general themes are the New Testament and the triumph of Christ. The south rose is 12 feet 9 meters in diameter and contains 84 panes of glass. Radiating out from a center medallion of Christ, it consists of 4 concentric circles over 12 medallions, 24 medallion quadrilobes. Sorry, I know that's not right. And 24 trilobes. Quadrilobes, I'm sure. All right, and the gargoyles. The cathedrals in High Gothic style became increasingly elaborate, and over several centuries, builders added towers, pinnacles, and hundreds of sculptures. In addition to religious figures, many Gothic cathedrals are heavily ornamented with strange and leering creatures. They are not just decorative. Originally, they were water spouts, so you can see the open mouths, where the sculptures protected the foundation from rain as they went out away from the cathedral to pour water away. Since people in medieval days could not read, the carvings took on the important role of illustrating the lessons from the scriptures. All right, so there's a cutaway view of what the Gothic cathedral looked like. This is John Burge again. You see all the diagonal ribs, the oculus, the lanceolate, the triform, the nave, the arcade. And there again is what we're looking at. As an engineering feat, we learned so much from this into later architecture of what was done to help support. Maybe you see some of the things happening in later buildings, especially in bridges. All right, so here is comparison. Here is Lyons Cathedral, there's Paris Cathedral, there's Chartres Cathedral, and then we'll end with Amiens Cathedral, which we haven't seen yet. And so you see the height as it grows. There's the arcade between all four of them. There is the gallery in all four of them. And there is the triforium in all of them. There's a clerestory.